The concept from the very beginning was rather simple, and that was trying to make it look absolutely real. Not pretty, not amusing, this gritty reality of it. Couple of years before we did this film, I saw Gillo Pontecorvo's film called The Battle of Algiers, black and white film recreating the struggle of Algerians to regain the country for themselves from the French. And I loved the film, I loved the look of the film, and it really made me believe that I was watching the actual events as one does in a good documentary film, not in a feature film. So when we got together with Schatzberg to do this one, we watched the Battle of Algiers and a few times, and we made certain decisions which prompted a lot of testing and finding the proper equipment to do it in New York as opposed to somewhere else, and the result is what you see.
Well, what were some of those decisions that you drew from Algiers and from the Battle of Algiers that you had to test out? I'm interested
For the
about the
camera to be inconspicuous.
to the audience, its style would be it wouldn't be overly stylized.
To the audience, as well as streetwalkers on a street in New York. Fortunately, nobody knew who Pacino was because it was his first film role. So we could put him on Broadway and 72nd Street with a bunch of pedestrians.
And no one would react.
And nobody would react, and the camera was hidden. Or we're using long lenses, exceedingly long lenses, so the people across the street didn't know that they were being filmed.
Was that the primary reason you decided to use long lenses, or were there any story purposes? I noticed that there were quite a lot of long following takes, people in the street, long lens far away. Was that primarily for the onlookers? Or?
No, onlookers was one a reason. The other one was the compression of long lens. In fact, it created a lot of tension with the producer of the film in the first week of shooting. It was Daryl Zanuck who ran the studio, and after he saw the first 3 days of dailies, he called to voice his unhappiness. He's hoping to see New York on the screen, and he doesn't see New York. And we try to explain that the cumulative effect of this long lens approach is going to be New York. Perhaps not New York in the sense of Empire State Building and
tourist attractions,
but a real New York, and that's what we're after. And I remember the word we got back is, well, this film's cheap enough, do what you want. Allowed
so you could get away with it.
Right. Exactly.
And it serves the story pretty well. I mean,
I think so.
It's very claustrophobic. It's also very intimate. And these are not people who necessarily enjoy New York, the tourist New York or the grand New York. They're in the sort of the gutter.
Well, there is no correlation there.
Yeah.
It's not a tourist film. And, it never will be.
Right. In addition to long lenses, I notice a somewhat liberal use of zooms, and I bring this up for a very particular reason, because students that I have now often avoid noticeable zooms. There is a certain era where when zooms were first made more viable, that they had a life in pictures, and then they sort of became more and more invisible to the point where now first-time cinematographers, young cinematographers, feel uncomfortable with them. What are your thoughts on the zoom? Do you still use the zoom as much in your movies now as we see in this one from '71?
I don't think we used zoom lens much in this film. I cannot think of one single shot actually. Perhaps it's been a while since I shot it,
Yeah.
but it never occurred to me to use the zoom here. Whatever seemed real in terms of using of the lens or the lighting, that's what we were trying to do. Given a choice, we would have done it in black and white, but it was a 20th Century Fox film that had to be released in color, so that was out of the question. But as a result, I was trying to desaturate the color out of it as much as I possibly could and keep the gamma of color as close to cold blue, unpleasant, sort of cold life as opposed to pretty beigey.
Yes. How are you achieving the gamma compression into that color?
Mostly by filtration, either on the lenses or on the light, or sometimes both.
So on set, you were affecting the control first. It wasn't just in color grading.
No.
I actually have to say that I almost never noticed any signature of stage lights, of movie lights. It all looked very naturalistic, and I'm sure that was probably a primary goal of yours. So I'm surprised to hear about your gelling of lights.
You would be surprised. I would shoot very long shots of Broadway and 71st Street and sidewalks, store windows, and all of that, having pre-rigged lights in the stores to shoot the light outside, and sometimes with gels. But I was trying to use the type of equipment that would be not surprising for the passerby. So it wasn't a film light on a stand, but would use clip lights on the awnings, very much like you see in Chinatown, in front of those fish stores. Nobody paid any attention, but those lights were controlled, meaning color, temperature of light, and all that was to the par. The last touch of reality of the film, to close that issue, actually took place after the screening of probably the first assembly of the film. The film was finished, the music was added, and for the first time, 5 of us saw it in a screening room with film, with music, and suddenly became a completely different film. I don't know how many of you noticed there is not one note of music in this. And we spoke after the screening about it, and I think a good decision was made to remove the music, which was pretty good as a music, but the film
it just gave it
became a completely different
more
film.
lyrical somehow, the emotional arc.
So
I find that was very impactful actually at the end credits when the movie ends, just sort of abruptly, and you're sitting trying to examine exactly what has developed, what has changed since the middle of the film. After he's been in and out of jail a couple times, he's in and out of jail yet again, and she's maybe still an addict. So what's changed? And then it abruptly ends, and there's credits and no music. You're sitting there. It really seems to hit you. I think this absence of music really
it's a moment for respite of the audience to arrive to whatever conclusions they choose to.
There are a couple of films, actually, I didn't realize this right at first, but there are a couple of very quintessential New York City streets films. I mean, there's dozens, hundreds of them, but a couple of them really stand out in your career. Midnight Cowboy, this movie, Smoke, for example, others. Do you feel like this is a look and a style and an ability that you have been able to design yourself, and so people have an idea of New York that derives somewhat from your movies? Do you feel like maybe you've been pigeonholed by people, so you just keep getting hired to do these New York style, gritty New York movies? What is the relationship that you have with this look and this approach to New York storylines?
First of all, I spent almost entire life living in urban environment.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand it better than I understand the wilderness of Wyoming or Montana. Having said that, I would love nothing better than to shoot a nice Western and breathe fresh air.
There's a couple of shots when they go and get the dog, especially after they have the dog, that shot, 2 trees on either side, and she says, let's wait before we hit heroin again. Stunning and gorgeous, and that is warm in contrast to blue. That natural photography was really stunning.
Yes, but they're back on the jungle of concrete 2 minutes later.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody pigeonholed me, or I certainly wasn't trying to create a signature style of cinematography. In fact, I'm very much against it. I think each film ought to be looked at differently, and I think good cinematographer reads the screenplay and develops a point of view at what this film ought to look like for this particular film. And nothing is worse for me than thinking, I have a style and I'm going to accept only films to shoot which will fit my style.
So not something at all?
No. I think I have the greatest respect for each scene in the film and certainly each script. And I think one ought to find a way to visualize it differently from other films that were made.
Well, I have a question actually about this script, the structure of the script. There are a couple of stark and startling jumps forward in time where just, as all movies have, a compression of time, and we jump to a scene a couple days later, a couple of months later. But there seems to be a very conscious absence of certain familiar procedures, like the process of getting arrested, for example, or the process of spending time in jail. It's cut out entirely. All of a sudden, from Bobby in the basement where he's going to steal goods with his brother, he says, Hank. We see a cop in the alleyway. Next thing we see, Al Pacino's comfortably in jail. He's not being processed into jail. He's just been there for a while. And I wonder, was this in the script already, or were scenes just excised in the edit? Were you approaching this knowing that you were going to be skipping those moments?
Yes, we did. I think the greatest tool of film is the ability to develop a style in which the audience is participating in receiving information that the filmmakers offer to the audience. And people are smart. If they see a cop pulling into the alley and we know that Bob is inside trying to steal something, and another scene of a gun being pulled out and handcuffs being applied and right to the booking station, it's superfluous. It is a human story, not the story of the process.
Right.
So I think it would be a waste of screen time.
Yeah.
So I'm all for it.
Yeah, and it allows you to spend the additional time on personal moments. This movie's
On what
heavy
matters,
personal
right.
moments, and yes. I have a general question for you. This has been something that's been playing on my mind. In even the 3 movies that I've listed off already, there are very impressive actors you've worked with. Al Pacino, Harvey Keitel, noteworthy actors who are masters of acting. And I'm sure you've worked with less talented actors than the stars that we can all recognize from your films. Do you change your shooting style, lens, or distance of camera from actors depending on their performance? Either if they're, more using their body, if they're more using their face, if they're not very good actors, is there a way you can hide their performance problems with the way you photograph them?
Yes.
What are your tricks? I want to know.
Well, I hope none of you are actors, so. You have a variety of choices to your disposal. First of all, if the actor is not terribly capable of carrying out the scene, you can be further away from him with the camera. You can use wider lens. You can come around, not to make him vulnerable to the camera by being head on, but you can shoot from the side or find something to obstruct the...
Right, protect the actor from this reminder.
Not a reminder, but basically don't show him naked in front of the audience. And of course, the biggest tool is the lighting. You can either light him brightly and he will be exposed, or you can put him in a silhouette, or you can light something behind him that's going to draw the audience's eye to this lamp on the sconce on the wall instead of to his face. And the camera movement itself can obstruct an awful lot. So you use all those things in order to help hide the fact that it's not terribly believable what this actor is trying to do.
That's great. That's very helpful. I'm going to open it up to the room in just a second. I have one more question for you. I see that you just finished a movie recently. It's in post-production now. At least that's what
I haven't shot a movie in 2 years. So,
okay.
So,
well, I wonder if post-production has been delayed. 2 years ago may change the nature of my question a little bit. I'm wondering, with the advent of wide release quality digital cameras like the Alexa. I guess the Alexa was just about out at 2 years ago, and the
Correct.
Red. What have you noticed changing on set in the act of shooting a film in production? What have you noticed in your most recent film from 15 years ago, 30 years ago? What differences are there?
I attempted to shoot on digital technology 2 films, and I shot extensive tests in preparation of it, and in both cases it ended up going to film, so it became a moot point. I think clearly digital technology is the way of the future, and there's no sense of fighting it. Having said that, with pleasure I see films which are being done, and not necessarily large films, I mean large in terms of the budget, but even intimate films. I mean, a recent release of a week ago, a film called The House Behind the Pines. I don't know how many of you seen it. None yet. It was just released. It's Brian Gosling playing a tough guy and having difficult relationships with people around him. A $4 million film, from what I understand, that was shot on film. 2 perf, widescreen, finished in digital intermediate, of course, and it looks terrific. Film like The Master, which was shot on film and 70 millimeter film. So it's this kind of tug of war between film and video both do fine job,
Mhm.
and I wouldn't discriminate against one or the other. If people have something to say,
Mhm.
either visually as cinematographers, and choose either digital or film, it doesn't matter, as long as the end result
Mhm.
is something that is appropriate to the film. As far as mechanics of work,
Well, for example, I noticed that on the movie we just saw from 40-something years ago, the size of the crew is probably, at least as far as the named people in the credits go, probably about a quarter or a fifth of what you would see on an average film released today. I'm sure that changes your experience on set. The mechanics, as you said.
it does, but whatever is needed, you know, bigger is not better, or vice versa. It's, you know, it's like going on a skiing trip. You take the equipment that you need to have in order to ski down the mountain, and not any more or not any less. Doing the film is pretty much the same thing. What is troubling me in terms of digital cinematography is certain loss of intimacy between the cinematographer and the performers, actors. By the sheer virtue of cinematographer being stuck in front of the monitor next to the technician, who is his right arm, while his operator and the actors are 40, 50 feet away. I like to see actors' face in front of me. I often make decisions based on what I see, how to adjust the light or drop the camera a couple of inches or something very quickly after the first rehearsal. And I don't like this running back and forth between the video tent and
So do you still stand closer to the set or closer to the camera?
I stand right next to the lens if I can.
Yeah. So do you always work with an operator, or do you ever operate yourself?
I like operating by myself. It depends on the project. But my time on the set is better used if I work with an operator. While the rehearsal is in progress, I can turn to the gaffer and ask him to prepare the next setup instead of looking through the lens and operating. And all that.
Thank you. Any questions from the floor?
I'd like to know if you would change anything not on those scenes that were really successful, but in the movie, because whenever I shoot my projects, like a week from now, I'm like not satisfied at all with the results I have. So my question is, would you change anything in that movie?
Look, probably the answer is yes, I would change many things. At the same time, it has been 40 years since I shot this, so which specific things, it's sort of too far in the past to contemplate, but one is never satisfied. The work is never actually finished, it's abandoned in a way, you know, and you move on to the next.
Thomas Barnes has a question.
So, could you talk about the way you collaborate with directors and how that affects the visual design of the film, both on a large scale and in detail, the actual choice of framing, angles?
The single most important aspect in cooperation with the director for me is not on the set. It starts months before we start filming. It's in pre-production. We talk about scenes. We talk about things that we like in the work of other people. With Jerry Schatzberg, it was a sort of an easy way of communicating because his background is still photography. So he was visually very astute. And it was a shorthand in communication. And this was the second film we did together, probably followed by another 3. So we've done 5 or 6 films together. Once certain parameters are established, enough photographs are looked at, enough discussions take place about things that we both have seen, or very often rented film and saw it together. Then the rest is communicating those things to the people who are going to help us bring it to life, meaning production designer, art director, costume designer, and so on and so on. And when everybody is brought together on the same page, by the time you start filming, it becomes sort of like driving and talking at the same time. It's easy. If that process is compromised and not enough time was spent in pre-production, if the director thought that I was talking about something and I thought that he agreed to something else, on the set, it's impossible to rectify. Excuse me. Once you have actors in front of you, you cannot say, well, what did you mean you wanted cheerful? No, it's not cheerful. It's or color scheme and so on and so on. And after the discussions in pre-production are over, I always insist on shooting extensive tests with the art director to choose the color palette for the sets or interiors, natural locations that could be always repainted or dressed. Hair and makeup, costumes. It's easy. You can do it in 2 days prior to actually shooting, and if something jumps up as a false note in those tests, it's easy to rectify. So by the time you start filming, there are no surprises. It was basically legwork.
How soon in advance of first day of shooting do you prefer to be involved? How much time is minimum for you?
I don't think any less than 2 weeks is acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
More the better.
And then that it's full time from 2 weeks out.
Oh yes, yes.
Yeah, Nas.
Especially the first half of the film.
I'm sorry? Thank you.
She says for the first half of the film. Or, okay.
Throughout the entire film, actually, I noticed this, was especially in the first half an hour,
Yes.
almost nothing is in focus. Like, you almost never use sharp focuses. The faces, even when the background is completely out of focus, still Al Pacino and Kitty, still they are not completely in focus. Was it
Well,
conscious choice?
well, first of all, the
I have to get my ass checked.
the AC would be very unhappy to hear it from you. But no, actors were in focus. I didn't see the screening. Actors were in focus. But the fact is that we used very long lenses, 600, 800 millimeter lenses, which in those days were not as good as what you have available today. So the sharpness of those lenses was certainly less than what you can get today. And the background, because of it was very shallow, depth of field had to be out.
Yes, sir.
What sort of qualities do you look for in directors, and like the directors you work with? What were their good qualities, and the not so good directors you work with? What did they lack?
Well, I never was privileged to cast the director of the film, but I like people who are honest in their approach to work. I don't like wishy-washy directors. If somebody says something, I would like to believe that he or she means it. And I can use it as a constant in order to develop a language with the director. And I like them to be serious about what they do. It makes me work harder, and I enjoy it better.
Michelle.
Hi.
Overall, the image was a lot of grain. It was really, really grainy. I was wondering if that was your choice, like aesthetic choice for the movie, and how did you get to make that look?
It was a conscious decision for a grainy look because we thought it adds to the reality of image. In terms of how to go about it, forced development of the film helped a great deal. And we did it a lot in this film.
So we've been discussing this process, we've been referring to it as push processing. Would you have a strict equivalency in underexposing at a certain number of stops and then pushing it the same amount, or would you still expose closer to normal and push it anyway?
I'm sort of a stickler for blacks. I don't like gray images. I like blacks to register as blacks, so you can have, your eye can have a relationship to other colors surrounding it. So I was trying not to underexpose more than 2 stops. If I remember correctly, I had extensive tests on it for this film. And in order to print on the higher printing lights, in order to regain the blacks lost by pushing it.
Do you remember actually which film stock you used?
Yes, I think it was a 54, Eastman Kodak 54, which was in those days rated at 100 ASA, not all that much.
Oh, it was just because of what we were just talking.
Okay.
It's curious though, because if you push the film, it's really desaturated. So like, how? I know if you push film, colors will be really saturated, and this movie was not the case. But the blacks were really solid, and it was great. I'm just curious how was with probably the production designer or something to make push stuff, but
And also get desaturation.
washed out.
Well, it's a question of lighting. You can sort of play with it to arrive at the happy in between that you can accept, and it's not going to jump up on either end of the spectrum.
Anyone else?
What was the, shooting in New York like in 1970 or whatever, and how many days did you have to shoot this film?
We shot it in, I think, 43 shooting days. Shooting in New York in those days were probably slightly different than it is today. Unions were much more stringent and controlling and not all that pleasant to deal with. So you're trying to surround yourself with people who are members of those unions that you can spend 10, 12 hours a day with relative pleasure as opposed to a hassle. What changed a great deal were things in terms of shooting on the streets of New York, which clearly this was, relationship with the police force. It was a great deal of corruption going on, and you had to have production people who knew how to arrange certain things for your work to go smoothly instead of being interrupted. That changed a great deal since then. It's much more civilized city. Very much. I quite frankly, I did a project a few years ago in Paris, also Paris and other French cities. It wasn't any different than shooting New York today. However, when I came to the States and started working, it was a different world. It really was. Did I answer your question? Or?
Yeah, I guess it's the look of the city in such a different era. And even the garbage on the street, you're kind of going, did they have to bother to dress the set? Or was it just like that, it's so rough and tumble in those days?
It was pretty much what you see on the screen. I was very familiar with the neighborhood because my first apartment in New York was on Columbus Avenue and 71st Street, literally a block away from Needle Park. So I knew the neighborhood well, and it was what you see. On a year and a half before this film, I shot my first New York film, and I got very extensive sort of research on what New York looked like, what the street like. In Midnight Cowboy, we were concentrating on 42nd Street, not on. And both the director and myself came from Europe, and pre-production on that film took about over 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
We had to learn what the reality of Texas was,
Mm-hmm.
what Florida looked like, and what New York looked like in order to do it. So we would take those long trips and to anchor our thoughts. And writer Waldo Salt was participating in it very helpfully. So, so I learned what the streets of New York look like in steps from film to film to film. This was a step number 2.
Thomas had a question. I see you, Trip. Go ahead, Thomas.
I saw a noticeable change in contrast in the interior shots when the addiction was getting developing, and I felt like it helps to tell the story kind of getting maybe more dangerous, maybe even more passionate about. I don't know if you were like very conscious about it. What can you tell me how you manage that contrast through all the
I didn't have any specific design for contrast of the film or the sequence, but we knew that certain scenes required softer approach, lesser contrast than the others, and especially in the scenes between Pacino and Kitty Wynn, we tried to keep it underlit but with a lower contrast to show their intimacy in the middle of their miserable lives. And that was sort of conscious.
Trip.
I just had an observation about the pre-heroin part of the movie and the post-heroin part of the movie. Like the scene when he was being charming with her inside that hospital room, and the reaction shot of her, like the final beat where she like laughs, and then we cut to the next scene. That looked it looked prettier and sunnier and brighter and more heartfelt and everything. Like, so was that intended to look real, or was it intended to be happier and sunnier on purpose to cause that shift after the movie, to have that world change later on?
The beginning of the film, you see 2 young people who are pleasant enough, and she's attracted to him, he's certainly attracted to her. And it was sort of, we treated it as a normal two youngsters trying to spend some time together. And as the situation gets deeper and it becomes apparent that their lives are not, I hope, as yours is or anybody else's in this room, that he's dragging her into the world of misery and danger, we change gradually as their lives were sliding down. We felt obliged to do the same thing with the visual aspect of it, just to fit the film.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
How did you capture the sound, especially for a hidden camera shot?
Sound was a big issue in this film. It also was a problem for the director. During the first couple of days, the director couldn't see the actors because they were so far away from the camera. And finally, he figured out, asked somebody to go to some sort of store and bought a few pair of binoculars, and he was sitting next to the camera looking through binoculars to see the actors. Soundman had the same problem, and we ended up extensively using, I don't know if you know what lavaliers are, hidden mics and those were early stages of those microphones, so the receivers had to be hidden somewhere in the doorways. And it was, I felt sorry for the sound mixer watching him sweat it out. But it was worth it.
It was worth it, yeah, I would say so. Do you ever feel any pressure to compromise your lighting or your camera position because the sound person's having a hard time? I do notice that they like to say that, you know, there's no place to put the boom, there's shadows everywhere. Why do there have to be so many lights?
It's an old battle between the cinematographer and sound mixer. A very close friend of mine, a director who lives and works in Europe, once at dinner table told me that he always chooses a sound mixer, a woman, and a pretty woman. I asked him why. He said, well, when the usual argument on a set, would you turn off this light because the shadow of the microphone, if the woman suddenly makes a sad face, the cinematographer, without a question, turns off the light.
Yeah.
If there's a bad sound mixer, the fight starts.
Right.
Tug of war.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Holender. It was a wonderful meeting.